capital one-time expenditures, and you'll see that in the budget we had $295,644 budgeted, and so far we've spent $180,272. That was for the parking lot. Eric mentioned that the furniture project was going on. That is occurring as we speak, but we have not seen a bill for that project, so, but we're well under budget at the moment. Otherwise,
What else is included in that capital expenditures other than the furniture? Does that pretty much take everything that was?
yeah, I think there was, there's the new wall for the cat's room is in there, the furniture in one of the other offices. I'd have to go back to the original budget and look. And the parking lot, I mean, that was most of it. There's probably some, there's a lighting project maybe. Pretty sure there is a lighting project.
We can bring that back next month.
Yeah, we could.
To have a review. Madam Chair, would it be okay we bring that back next month for a quick review, if you like?
Yes, that would be fine. I was going to make a request of the financial committee when we get done here, so yeah, that's fine to bring it back.
Okay. Otherwise, financially, it's turning out to be a somewhat decent year. Revenues are fine. There's no problems currently. You can look at the graphs on 11.1 and 11.2, kind of see what the revenue trends look like. You'll see that the fees and insurance has a pretty big increase. That's mainly due to the cyclical nature of the EH fees, which start coming in. They start billing those out in November, so we start collecting all the restaurant fees and childcare fees and all that kind of stuff that gets renewed for calendar years. So there's a big upsurge in that fee, and then that will level back out closer to what it should be. Contract funding is up, but we have a bunch of additional contracts due to the COVID process, so none of that was in the budget originally. So when we do the budget revision, when we finally get to that, that number will be adjusted to take into consideration those contracts. Investments is pretty normal, looks fine. 11.2, you'll see expenditure trends. Sub-grantee payments, so since most of our sub-grantee payments are to the Crisis Center, and that's only for the first half of the year, that fee looks really high, but it'll just level back out once we reach the half a year and we stop paying him. So it'll level back to where it is, and we know what that number is, so I've already budgeted the exact number that we're paying him. You'll see the big increase in capital expenditures due to the parking lot, which was over half of the amount we were spending on capital projects this year. So that shot up pretty high once we paid for that project last month. And everything else is trending pretty close. Personnel is very close.
Madam Chairman, could you have explain a little bit to me? I'm a little bit foggy on sub-grantee.
So sub-grantee is payments. It's a contract we have with somebody else that someone else is paying for. So for the regional or for the Crisis Center, we're getting that money from the state, but then we're just passing it on to the Crisis Center.
So it's a pass-through.
It's a pass-through. Yep. So it's a pass-through money. So
Okay.
we used to get a little piece of that money to keep, but now right at the moment we're just passing all of it on to the Crisis Center. So right now it's 100%. We're just collecting it from the state and as a pass-through, and then we're giving it to the Crisis Center. Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's sub-grantee. There are some other small sub-grantee amounts in some of the other contracts, but most of those are just small.
Any other questions so far? Continue, Jeremy.
Madam Chair, I wanted to point out that, you might want to touch upon the $118,000 we received
Oh yeah, we could.
from CFAP. It's actually for last
Right.
fiscal
So
year.
When we talked about the COVID monies, that $118,000 that we received from the CARES Act, the CFAC money, that is money reimbursing us for expenses that happened in last fiscal year. So when we get that $118,000 now, we have no expenditures to offset that revenue, right? So it's just an extra revenue to the district. Because last fiscal year is closed, it's over, we paid for the stuff that occurred then during that fiscal year and it's done. When we get that revenue now, for this fiscal year, it's an extra revenue. It's a revenue that we have no expenditures to offset. Does that make sense? There's nothing to offset that revenue. Because the fiscal year is over. So this fiscal year, we don't have 118,000 in expenditures to offset that 118 in revenue. We just get the 118 in revenue. So it ends up being like a carryover item. It's an extra amount of cash that we get this year that we didn't account for. We have no expenditures to offset. So in response to the COVID, we got that 118,000 plus another 250,000 from contracts that was also reimbursed this fiscal year for expenditures from last fiscal year.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so there's, that was 251,390 in sub-grant payments and $117,886 in CARES Act money. So all of that money came in this fiscal year for expenditures that occurred last fiscal year. And some of that was due to, one, the CARES Act paying slower. Some of it was, we did get a sub-grant that allowed us to bill out costs prior to the sub-grant being issued. Most of the time with sub-grants, they have a hard start date, and that hard start date is the date that everyone signs it. With the COVID money that flowed through IDHW, the start date is actually in March when the emergency declaration was issued by the feds. So we were allowed to back bill that to the activities that we did in March and April before we got the actual sub-grant. So, but none of that money was paid until this fiscal year. By the time we received that contract in April and billed it out in May, then the money didn't show up until July. So all of that is extra revenue for this fiscal year because we have no expenditures to offset.
So Jeremy, where does it show up? If I'm looking here at 11.0.
So that is showing up in 11.0. It's under the contract amount. So you'll see like environmental health and preparedness contracts.
Yeah.
Shows that we budgeted 653,000 for the year and we've already collected 570. Those contract dollars that are coming in, because we didn't budget for those dollars coming in this fiscal year, we had them in last fiscal year budget, right? So it's extra revenue this year. So when we do the budget revision, we'll make a correction to those numbers to show this additional revenue. But right now, we just show that we've collected 87% of the contract revenue in environmental. When that's not really 87% of this fiscal year's money, some of it is from last fiscal year.
Thank you.
So I'm adding those two numbers, the 251 plus the 117.
369,000.
Yeah, 369,000 that we don't revenue, that we don't have expenses
Right.
accounted
Right.
which is the real nice problem.
Yeah, I mean, some of it will offset some COVID costs that we don't have, that we won't recover from. This year, we'll have some costs that the district's gonna have to cover, indirect costs. But there is some excess dollars from costs from last fiscal year. Okay, is there any other questions?
So I have a question.
Sure.
Go ahead, Helen.
If we had expense and we didn't get the revenue till this year,
Yes.
what did that do to last year's budget?
So what that would do in a normal fiscal year, if we were close on budget, we would either have to come and ask for reserve funds to pull out of our reserve to use it, or we use what excess revenue we had from last year. So last year, if you remember, I gave a big presentation on what our carryover funding was, right?
Right.
So what that money, we just used some of our carryover money, the excess revenue from last year, the state revenue, the contract revenue that was in excess. We used that to cover those fees last year and still ended up with a carryover amount.
So we weren't in a,
We weren't in the black, or we weren't in the red. We were still in the black. We just used the funds that we had available last year to pay for those items.
Thank you.
If we were in the red, well, we'd have to go for tax anticipation notes.
Well, we can't use tax anticipation notes, but we would have to we would have to access our JEPA and our LGAP investment
Our
funds
reserve funds.
and pull cash out of our investment funds to cover the dollars that we were spending. But last year we had revenues in excess of our expenditures, so we had revenues that were higher last year already. Our fees came in, like for example, our septic fees came in at like $500,000 and we budgeted that at like 350,000, so we were in excess on our, because of how many septic systems we did, we came in, we had
30%
excess.
above,
Yeah,
yes.
and that looks like that trend is probably
I was
continuing
gonna say, I
this
think
year.
that's going on.
Yes.
this year.
Yeah. but-
Yeah, we budgeted, I had this discussion with Craig yesterday, we budgeted 390,000 and it looks like that's probably gonna be closer to $500,000 again this year for septic systems. So that revenue source is gonna have to be bumped up when we do the
No, just
revision.
stop sandbagging.
Now, if our
I'll
septic
go
tank
back to-
fees only covered 100% of the cost, would be okay. On your income, I noticed that Camas County has paid 0% of their assessment, and the County County has only paid 33%.
So,
Is there a reason for that?
Camas only pays once a year. So most of the counties pay every month. Camus's bill for the whole year is only 7,000 and some change, yeah. So they usually pay that once a year. So it just hasn't come up to the time when they pay it. So, and then, Kasia, occasionally a county will miss a month and then they'll pay a catch-up month. That, I'm assuming they're just behind for whatever reason.
I think we approved November the other day.
Yeah, so I'm sure it's just more of a timing issue than anything else. They just, for whatever reason, missed October's payment and they'll double
We had a
up.
lot of people in our clerk's office.
Looks like Jerome's living.
that
Yeah.
Been
And that,
gone.
but that regularly happens. You'll see it. It doesn't always, every county doesn't pay every month. So sometimes you'll see a 0 and then the next month they pay double and catch up. Some of it's timing issues. They'll issue that check at the end of the month. So for them, it went out in the right month, but for us, when we received it, is the next month. So it creates a timing issue. So I don't panic until I see it like 90 days behind, and then we contact the county. So.
Thank you.
No problem.
At least we
Does
know
this
how
answer
long
all the
ago.
questions on COVID reimbursement and capital expenditures and stuff that everybody had? Any further questions?
Linda, this is Anjani. It answers all of my questions, but I can't remember, was it this item or another where we were gonna talk about, money to assist people with immunizations? I just wanted to state that I'm
It's
very
down-
much in
That's
favor of
action
that.
item.
Yeah, it's down further in the agenda.
Yeah, this-
Okay, I didn't know.
For action.
Got it, okay. I'll
So-
wait.
Thank you.
I guess one more thing I'll mention just quickly, just since we've been talking about, the excess dollars. 11.4, you've seen this a million times, but down at the bottom, so when we talk about our carryover fund or our excess dollars, that number is represented by the very last number on that page, so where it says pass-through account, current balance, 2.1 million. That's where we see that. So last year, at the end of the fiscal year, it ended with 1.6, and currently it's sitting at 2.1. And that is a representation of those dollars from the state and the sub-grants coming in for this fiscal year that were unaccounted for. So currently, if we were closing the books today, we'd have a pass-through, or we'd have a carryover funding of 2.1 million. I expect we'll spend some of that during the rest of this fiscal year, but right now that's kind of like the trend. Usually it perks up July because we get an influx of money from the state, and then we kind of spend that money down to December, and then in January we get another influx of the other half of the state funding, shoots back up. This fiscal year, it shot up in July, and it kind of trended down, and then we got those influx of dollars from the COVID money, and so it influx back up. So it's just, it's high, higher than I like to see it. So,
So this is money that we actually have in the bank, it's not anticipation of COVID reimbursements?
that's correct. This is cash on hand after your, after the dedicated reserves. So after you take out all the dedicated reserves, the building fund and all the other things the board has already set money aside, that's the excess cash in the accounts that we have on hand, not anticipated cash.
So if we do not get the reimbursement 100% from the COVID tracing dollars and stuff, we will still have money to cover the payroll we've expended.
Yes, yes, just like we did last year, just like we covered those costs last year, that we didn't get those revenues in, but we covered those costs to do that contact tracing in last year's budget, even though we didn't get the revenues in until this fiscal year.
Madam Chairman, question.
Yes, Roy?
What do we do with our excess funds? Do we have anything out on interest?
Yes, so most of our dollars are sitting either in the joint powers or the LGAP or the diversified bond fund at the state level. So, and you guys get those reports quarterly showing what the interest rate is.
Less than 1%.
One is quite low this year, yeah. Last year, they were both right over around 2.5%, and this year, one's 0.7-ish, and one's 1.8-ish, I think, right off the top of my head. But you'll get that report next month, in December.
Yeah, that's why I was just getting at, the quarter ends in December, so
Yeah.
it'll be in the board packet next month.
Yes, it'll be in the board packet for next month, yep,
Thank
correct.
you, Jeremy, the new members and such. Any further questions on this? I would entertain a motion that we accept this report for filing, if there's no further questions or discussions.
This is Bob, I'll make that motion.
Roy
Is there a
seconds.
second? Who was the second?
Roy seconds.
Roy. Okay. It's been moved by Bob and seconded by Roy that we accept the financial report for filing. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carried. Someone just joined the meeting, is that Mrs. Buxton?
Yes, that's Miss Buxton. Madam Chair, Miss Buxton's just joined us, with respect to her time, and, she's a very, very busy lady. We really appreciate that she's able to join us today. I know we just moved her back to the agenda. I was wondering if there's any chance we can move her forward in the agenda.
I think what we did was say the hour of 3 o'clock.
When it
Yeah,
is that.
oh, okay, it is that, yeah. Okay.
One thing I would like to say, I have received the recommendation, and I would like the board to consider this when we review this, as that we have a financial committee, and that's made up of Brent and Roy. And the recommendation came to me that maybe they work with Jeremy and Melody and come back to the January meeting with a recommendation for the board as to what they wanted to do. So when you listen to Mrs. Buxton and Melody on this, kind of keep that in the back of your mind so we can make an informed decision, because there's a great deal of options in this presentation. So, and we don't want to rush into something.
Absolutely.
So